Repetition is one of the many wonderful tools in the Haiku Poet's Toolbox. During this presentation and workshop, we will first examine some of the major ways repetition can be used effectively in haiku, and we'll read some famous and not so famous examples. Then, participants will be able to try their hand at using the technique via a writing prompt. At the end, we'll give folks a chance to share their haiku. Brad Bennett has published 2 collections of haiku, A Drop of Pond, which won a Touchstone Award from the Haiku Foundation, and A Turn in the River. He is currently haiku and senryu coordinator of Frogpond. He teaches creative writing to kids and haiku to adults. Brad thinks Jeannie is a virtuoso at using repetition in haiku. Jeannie Martin, haiku poet, teacher, and retreat leader, is the author of 11 chapbooks of haiku and 2 books, one with Vincent Tripi of Haiku Reflections. A social worker, she brings haiku to marginalized and vulnerable populations, including homeless and those with memory loss. Jeannie is a member of several haiku writing groups and is pleased to be presenting with Brad at the HSA. During the presentation, we'd ask for everyone to stay muted. And after the presentation, when they give time, Brad and Jeannie have requested that you raise hands, but I'm sure they'll instruct you about this when the time comes. Thank you, and I'm turning it over.
Thank you very much, Celia, for your introduction and for moderating this session. And we want to thank Jay and Ignatius and all the folks who have organized this wonderful conference. Thanks to all the presenters, too, for your fun and intriguing presentations. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Jeannie, do you want to unmute yourself and say hello?
Sure, I keep unmuting myself and the mute comes back, so I'll have to keep an eye on that. Hi, everybody. Very glad you're here. Brad and I have been looking forward to this. This is going to be fun, and we'll all learn some definite things together.
So I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin. So Celia, can you see that? Jeannie, can you see that?
Yep, I can see it fine.
Fantastic. Okay. So thanks again for joining us. We believe that creating an authentic moment in the haiku is the first step in the writing process. But once we have written that first draft and we start to craft our haiku, we can use many tools in our haiku toolbox. Repetition is one effective and successful tool or strategy. So here's what we're going to be doing today. After an introduction, we're going to read a few classics. Then we will talk about how repetition works and describe 10 effects that you can achieve using repetition with some example poems to display how that happens. Then Jeannie will talk about how she uses repetition in her writing process. And she'll lead us in a guided writing prompt so that you can try it out for yourself. Finally, we hope to end with some of you sharing your poems that you've written with repetition. So let's start with a few classic haiku that feature repetition. Jeannie?
Lily, yep, Lily, out of the water, out of itself. We're going to read some of these twice. Lily, out of the water, out of itself.
After the garden party, the garden. After the garden party, the garden.
In what's left of our footprints, what's left of the wave. In what's left of our footprints, what's left of the wave.
The late, great Vince Tripi was quite adept at using repetition in haiku. He certainly influenced both of us with his expertise in and affection for repetition. Vince wrote a book called Call It Haiku, and here it is right here, in which he wrote about using repetition in haiku. Repetition in haiku is not just a play of words. It is the carrying extension and reaching out of a core word or words in a manner which invites the deeper meanings of the poem to fully be. Letting the cat in, the fog in. Letting the cat in, the fog in. So in this presentation, we're going to examine the repetition of words and phrases in haiku, not the repetition of sounds or phonemes that are part and parcel of devices like alliteration and assonance. Repetition can happen in different ways, obviously. Different parts of a haiku can be repeated: a word, a phrase, a fragment, a clause, or even a whole line. The repetition can also occur using different parts of speech: nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositional phrases. Like rhyme, repetition is very noticeable in haiku, and thus creates some strong effects. It can be distracting unless it's handled carefully. So when we use repetition, we think we should aim for resonance, not redundancy. The resonance it creates helps you stay in the moment and feel it more deeply. Repetition can also enhance the rhythm and meter of a haiku. For instance, sometimes it works like the repeated lines of a blues song, and you might hear that in some of the poems that we read later. Repetition can also help to unify the poem. As I mentioned before, repetition is very noticeable, so it's important to use it carefully, mindfully, and deftly. There are some ways you can use repetition that help a haiku resonate rather than sound redundant. For instance, if part of one word or phrase is slightly different, then the repetition doesn't distract. For example, in this next poem, there are two different compound nouns that include the word moon. Moonflowers, reflecting moonlight, coyote voices, Ferris Gilly. The repetitive sound of moon mimics the howling of the coyotes. In this next poem, the word dark is repeated, the second time as a root word with an added suffix. Dark, darker, too many stars, too far. Gary Hotham. Adding the suffix helps to add to the darkness in the poem. You can also change the grammar of a word. For instance, you can transform a noun into a verb, as in this following haiku here. Inside the frozen waterfall, water falling. Julie Warther. The word fall is first part of a compound noun, waterfall, then later it shows up as a verb, falling. This one also includes the word water twice in the poem in two different forms. The first as part of a compound word. Kind of feels like ripples at the base of the waterfall. Now let's look at 10 effects that you can achieve by using repetition in your haiku. A few of these categories were inspired by two articles I found online: Repetition for Meaning and Melody by Florence Villan, and Haiku Theory Part 1 by Dick White. As we mentioned earlier, one of the major effects of repetition, actually, let me just read this list first. So here's the list: resonance, emotional intensification, joy and wonder, again and again, similarity, completing the circle, endless infinity, Mobius strip, measurement, humor and irony. I'm going to start with resonance. Now, as we mentioned earlier, one of the major effects of repetition is to create resonance in your haiku. The repetition can act like ripples, as in the last poem that we saw, or sound waves that linger after you've finished reading the poem. Bird shadow, from tree shadow to fence shadow. Christopher Harold. This one feels like the shadows are rippling to me. The next poem describes literal sound waves. Yellow star thistle, the sound of the sound barrier breaking. Chuck Brickley. I love that second line, the sound of the sound. Let's move on to the second effect. Sometimes the resonance that repetition creates is kind of an emotional intensification. If you attended Michael Dylan Welsh's presentation yesterday, even in Kyoto, place names in haiku, you were treated to a whole bunch of wonderful examples of haiku that actually repeat place names to help accentuate the feeling of longing. So thanks, Michael, for giving us a foreshadow of what we're going to talk about today. The poet can also accentuate some other emotions like sadness or fear, as in this next poem. Awake in the darkness. Bill Kenny. In this next poem, the repetition creates a resonance in the first two lines that is contrasted with the fragment in the last line. A cold cup from a cold cupboard, morning sun. Touching this crocus as if it were the first, as if it were the last. Michelle L. Harvey. Firsts and lasts are always significant, and the inclusion of both in this poem with the repetition of as if it were helps to intensify the importance of each and every moment of our lives. The haiku, as Scott Mason reminded us in his wonderful book, The Wonder Code, is a poem of wonder. Wonderment, joy, and gratitude can be created and or affirmed by using repetition. Here's one of Jeannie's. Warm breeze, watching your eyes, watch a butterfly. A poppy, a field of poppies, the hills blowing with poppies. Now check out the unusual punctuation in this one, including the repetition of exclamation points. The next effect I call again and again. I think this is one of the most obvious effects. Repetition can describe or create mimicry or describe some kind of repeated action or phenomenon. For instance, you can mimic a sound, like the call of a bird. Song sparrow, more, 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 marsh marigolds. You can also mimic an experience or a phenomenon, human or natural, like what it means to be a river. Winter thaw, the river on top of the river. Alan S. Bridges. Birthday breakfast, jazz tune after jazz tune as the heater heats. The repetition of one jazz tune after another and the heater heating accentuate our experience of one birthday after another. The haiku is often called a poem of nouns, but verbs and their actions can be repeated to great effect as well. Sharp wind, the meadow gate bangs shut, bang shut. Jim Casian. Repetition sometimes includes things that are similar without necessarily being repetitive. It can identify and accentuate something like an association or a congruence. The sound of rain on the sound of waves. Elizabeth Searle Lamb. Here's another one from Vince Tripi. Fork in the trail, Fork in the river, fork in the swallow's tail. You can also start and end a circle inside your haiku. The first word can be repeated as the last word. This effect completes the circle and can create a lovely unification of the entire poem. Sand into sandstone into sand. Bill Cooper's haiku gives us a succinct 5-word explanation of a rock cycle that takes approximately 20 million years. She slips into the ocean slips into. Peter Yobu. I feel and hear wave upon wave upon wave. Barn swallows swallowed by the barn. Carolyn Hall. In this poem, the double repetition of barn and swallow creates an effect kind of like concentric circles or ripples in this poem. I hope you'll indulge me with the redundant name for this effect, endless infinity. Sometimes you don't want the circle to be completed, and repetition is a great technique to use to emphasize endlessness or infinity. Knitting late into the night, stars upon stars upon stars. Thank you, Jeannie. The river's mouth, no end to the journey. Michelle Root Bernstein. Sometimes the endlessness can be a reflection on the human condition or a kind of existential look at ourselves. Or it could be about how we think about what we think. Thus, repetition can create kind of a Mobius strip effect, perhaps a metacognitive examination, perhaps an intriguing paradox, like the next 3. Night train, watching myself, watching myself. Alan S. Bridges. Talk about reflection. Windfall apples, what I think about what I think. Carolyn Hall. Letting go of letting go. Wild blackberries. Victor Ortiz. Sometimes repeated words with prepositions between them can create a way to measure something. Fence line to fence line, buzzard's shadow. John Brandy. A banana slug, inch by inch by inch, giant sequoias. Some great contrast there. 2 ways of measuring. And the last effect that I want to measure, that I want to mention, is humor and irony. Spring equinox, too pregnant to sit, too pregnant to stand. So repetition can be funny, and comedians know this, and I think senryu authors like Tia know this as well. Judging a haiku contest, judging myself. So we've examined 10 effects that repetition can create. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Jeannie so that she can share how she uses repetition during her writing process. Jeannie, you ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Great. Brad, thank you very much. Of course, Brad and I have been over a lot of the haiku that Brad read. And even though I've read them before, seen them before, they just have such an impact. It was really a great selection. And I hope everybody enjoyed reading the variety of different images, different ways that the poems move. Certainly haiku really does add motion and life to each poem. So just a few thoughts here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my most recent experience writing a poem of a repetition haiku. In reading repetition haiku, we see with the poet's eyes, it really brings us directly into the poem. We are really there with the poet looking at what's going on. And I feel like the poems that Brad read really did do that. They bring us very close, not only to the experience, but to the poet's viewing of the experience. So we share that poet's direct and immediacy in terms of the writing, in terms of the moment. We see time and place unfold directly for us. If we think about some of the poems that were read, waking up in the dark, at the seashore, the sound of waves, all of the, watching the butterfly, all of those, we can really see ourselves in that particular time, in that particular place. And so that said, there's a lot of energy and motion in a poem that has that kind of repetition. So it does bring us directly into the present moment. And as we know, Basho said famously, in haiku, the distance between you and the pine tree disappears. And that is a wonderful quote that I go back to all the time and I often use in my teaching. And the second one is in haiku, there is no such, only the present moment exists. And I think that that also calls to that kind of immediacy. So we'll go on to the next slide here. So now we're getting down a little bit more practical. I want to say that it's very possible that a lot of you have written repetition haiku, and maybe you're here for the workshop to join us because it could be a favorite thing. If you haven't, you might want to look over some of your haiku and see where you might add repetition, because that will bring the poem closer to you. It could be that you've written a haiku that you like, but it has a little bit of a distance, has a little bit of your own analysis, your own kind of thinking about it. You're putting it through our minds rather than keep staying into more of a clear mind. So look through some of them and see what you can see. You might see a word there that you can repeat and take out another word. That said, it's very helpful to read a lot of haiku with repetition. And Brad provided us with a lot for our workshop, but also there's other ones. So when you're reading through anthologies or books of poems by favorite poets, really look for those with repetition. You also might want to identify a haiku poet who writes repetition haiku. There are a lot of them out there, a lot of us out there. And as you do that, start to look for that poet's haiku or Google them online to see what they might have and see how they might present themselves for you. Also be aware and comfortable with the effects and techniques we read just now and with the themes that lend themselves well to this kind of haiku. And I think bringing those themes help us as well. Sometimes you read a haiku and you think, I really like this. I don't know why. That's always fine. But also it's nice to be able to kind of back it up into this is the mode, this is the genre, this is the kind of state that the poet might have been in. So those are some of the kinds of ways that we would begin to think about that. Now, I want to I have a few notes here. I'm just going to pull my paper here. I hope everybody's having fun. I hope we always remember that haiku are simple, but yet complex. And that seems like how could that be? But the simpler they are, sometimes the more complex there's many different ways to look at those. So I want to share with you my latest attempt. And I decided to share my latest attempt because it might not be my best attempt. And we are at a conference together and like to think about this as a workshop. We're all sitting around the table and we're sharing these and thinking about them. So I'll tell you the situation. It was about 2 weeks ago. It was on a Saturday morning and I was journaling, which I often do, especially on a Saturday when I have time. I was sitting on the sofa and I was looking out and there was a lot of blue sky. You know, it was late May and sometimes you can get these really beautiful blue skies. So I was doing that and then I got a call from a friend who I hadn't talked to for a little while. So we were talking and we began to be like, well, what are you doing today? And she was like, what are you doing today? And then she said, well, I'm just about ready to go on a bike ride. And I liked that. After we hung up, I started to think about it. And I wrote this poem. It's a one line, riding forward, 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 the blue sky. Well, I didn't write it, I thought it. And I thought, it's good enough to write down. I may not keep it, I may be different, I'm not really sure, but it's enough. And I liked my friend, I thought maybe I would give it to her if it formed into something. So I did that. And then I went into the kitchen to wash the breakfast dishes. And I like to wash dishes, not always put them in the dishwasher. So I was washing them with the warm suds and the water, and I was taking them from the right to the left, putting them in the dish drainer. And as I did that, I thought, Jeannie, don't say riding, say biking. That's what she's doing. Otherwise, you want to get more specific and more concrete. So I thought biking is better. And then when I thought biking, I thought, well, of course she's riding forward. I mean, you're not going to be riding backward. So instead, I changed the poem to biking toward the blue sky. Now, I kind of like the poem. I read it to her. She likes it. I might keep it. I said the blue sky rather than just blue sky because I wanted to give that sky as a destination, and as a destination that you're really never going to reach. But nevertheless, the blue sky is there all around us as we ride maybe a morning bike ride. So that's what my current state is in terms of a haiku. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that, it helps you to think about, you write down an experience. This was very much of a motion one, and it was very visual, and I could see her. So I got inspired by that. But there's all kinds of inspiration around for repetition haiku. And that's the end of my presentation for this. All right, we're going to go on now to do a writing prompt, and I'm going to just check my time here. It's 4:28, and I think we're doing okay, Brad, with our time?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. This is, it's a variation on writing prompts that I've been using over the last year with over Zoom with people in basically in lockdown. And some of the goals with that is just for us to become really familiar with what we have in our houses, which we probably are, but even so, looking at them in a new way. And I'm just going to take a cup of tea here for a second. So I have some questions, we wanted to write this down so you would have that and see what we would be doing with this. What I'd like for you to do is each of you, probably in your home, could be an apartment or condo or house, or perhaps at a neighbor's, probably in your home. And think about what you have in your house that's an object of nature that you've had with you throughout the pandemic. This could be a seashell, a stone, a possible small pottery bowl, maybe a plant, whatever it is you want. And take a few moments to think about what you would want to select. This would be something that you're attracted to, that you like. It might be something that brings you a certain memory or a certain comfort. It might be something that you have handled, or something you have on your desk, or a plant that's kind of just been with you this whole time. Now, you also could use a cat or dog if you want to do that. Whatever it is that object of nature that you have close to you. So think about that for a minute. Now, if I were doing this as a small workshop, I would ask people to bring their objects and we would look at them over Zoom, but we don't want to spend that amount of time. If it's close by, that would be great. If it isn't close by, you can be thinking about it. But if you want to get up just for a second and find whatever it is that you have. I have a stone, and this is a special stone for me because it's small. It feels really nice in my hand. But I got it in Greece.
Not so
And it was my first opportunity to go to Greece, and I brought this stone back, and I haven't been back, but I really want to. So what we're going to ask you is to pick up the object that you've selected, look at the object closely, handle it, turn it over. If it's a seashell or it's a stone or even a plant, kind of look at it. And it might be thinking about our sensory experiences of haiku, something you can smell, something you touch. You might be able to listen to it either by shaking it or as a seashell listening into it. Certainly seeing it. is important, and you might even be able to taste it. All depends. Now, as you have your object, move the object away from you, sort of at arm's length, and look at it that way. Turn it around, and then move it closer to you. So you move it farther away, and you move it closer to you. And they were beginning to look at the associations in terms of motion, or even seeing it a little bit differently. So you want to go ahead and do that. Or you can have hand, take it from hand to hand, whatever it is your object is. Now, as you move that object, does anything happen? Do you see it differently? Do you see it as perhaps a little bit more alive? Do you see it in terms of its history, maybe how it came to your house, came to be with you, how long you've had it, and even more than that, why you chose that particular object in this day of June 13th, 2021 at our particular workshop. So you're looking at how you might respond as you move as what happens as you move the object, and then think of your own response. You may have a sense of pleasure about doing that. It's kind of fun. You may have a little poignancy or memory. Could be fond, it could not be. If it's a dog or cat, of course, you can have many different ones. It could be a plant that you've had for a really long time, or that you have some association. Sometimes we do with our house plants, an African violet or a philodendron or orchid, whatever that might be. And then as you are thinking about this, and you're beginning to maybe, if you want to start to take some notes about this, checking writing down the object, how you experience it, moving it back and forth. Then you begin to think about how you might look at the object closely, as if you see it in a new way. And I always like that, because I think of our haiku master, Isa, who often did that, the small objects of nature as if seen for the first time. And he often wrote a lot of poems. They weren't necessarily repetition poems, but they have a kind of movement, a kind of vitality, that kind of pop that we see in many of his poems and in these repetition poems. So again, you might think about where the object was before it came to your home. Could have been on a beach and forest, could be at the flower shop, pet shop, rescue, whatever it might be, out in your yard possibly. How did it arrive? Was it given to you as a gift? Or was it something you particularly got yourself? And when? You've had it during the pandemic, maybe years have gone by, or maybe it was new when you had to close your doors. Then think about, in terms of taking notes, what else you want to consider. We've talked about a few things, but there's many other things that are going to be very specific to the object that you chose. So just take a few notes about that. And I suggest, as you take notes, don't feel like you have to write everything in exact order, little straight lines and things, write them all over, circles, notes. And as I'm talking, you can see that I prefer the written on a piece of paper with a pen, because I think it triggers our imagination more. But you should do whatever you want, whatever you're used to. You might be used to writing them on your phone or something like that. So as you do that, and you're taking these notes, and we're going to give you a little bit more time to do that, maybe another minute or so, we'll go on to the next question. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that. And if you were with us and Brad around a table, we'd know when you were done. We don't exactly. But take your time thinking about the questions that we've just thought about and getting to know your object a little bit more in a familiar way. And I'm going to give it this 4:35. I'll give us another full minute. And I wish I could ask if you need more time, but I can't. The other thing is that as you think about what you might write about your object, often when we're in that space, we think of other things too. So you might have even other ideas of repetition haiku when you're outside walking, perhaps riding a bike like I did, riding in a car, whatever that might be. And you may think about a particular place that you like to walk, like on the beach is a really great place to write repetition poems. So let your imaginations free to kind of roam around, as well as thinking what we're doing right this moment. Now that you've done some of that, take another note to write to yourself. We'll give you a couple of minutes to see what you might have learned from this. In terms of, you may have a particular focus that you look for when you're writing repetition haiku. You might focus on motion, like I've mentioned, or on wonder, or on infinity, the different categories that we went over. You might have a particular leaning toward one more than the other, something that pops up, seen in plain sight, whatever that might be. And that's good for you to know and to think about in this type of activity. And then also, has anything changed for you as you begin to write these, as a way that you've been able to look and craft your haiku? They are, as we said, simple and yet complex. The complexity of a repetition haiku is that at first it looks very simple. It's kind of like, what? Same word over and over. But actually there's a great complexity in the nuance and in the timing and in the topic of that. So give yourself a chance to just reflect on that for a minute. We'll give you another minute or so. Now, as you're finishing with this, what I'll often say in my classes when people are first writing is, first writing in an activity like this is, you have your notes, you might want to put them away for a little while and go and do something else. Almost like I did when I wrote mine. I wrote it down, kind of liked it. What was it? Writing forward, the blue sky, but I went and did something else. And it was when I was doing something else that I actually came to my haiku better. But you can just put it away for a while and then come back to it and read it again, and you'll see what it might say back to you. And then you can review your words and see what you have, and you might have a new haiku, you might have more than one. But whatever you do, you've been able to exercise this repetition concept, use that concept, which is really fun and very useful. So I think we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm gonna bring this back, Brad, and we're gonna go ahead and see what people have written, and doing that, I think, by raising hands. But Brad, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. And why don't we read another Vince Tripi quote to get us thinking more about it. Repetition brings energy and the possibility of drawing the reader into direct participation with the poem.
Thanks, Brad.
Sure. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and we'd love to hear some of you read your repetition poems. It'd be great if people would raise their hands or If you look at the bottom of your screen to the reactions icon, if you click on that, there's a raise hand icon that some of you already know about. So if you raise your hands, we'll call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and read a poem with repetition in it. Shall we start with Carolyn Banks?
Trying to unmute myself.
You're all set.
Okay, very good. Deadheading. Leaf not ready to let go. Let go.
Oh, very nice. That's great. Thank you.
PMF Johnson?
Sure. I had the plaster angel here, so I said the plaster angel looking down on the plastered angel.
Well, there's a moment for you. Absolutely. That's great.
Maxiane?
I'm audible.
Yes.
His cat, then the podicure, then my cat.
Thank you.
Thank you. I like that. And it's nice you chose a pet.
Jacob
That is
Salzer?
cause clips.
The scent of a river in a seashell, the scent of the sea.
Right. It reminds me of the ocean one. She slips into the ocean slips into her.
And the river one that Michelle wrote too.
Mhm.
How about Michael Dillon Welsh?
I departed from the object, but I came up with this. Alzheimer's word. Repeating myself. Repeating myself.
Okay.
That has some emotional resonance.
Yes, it does.
Adelaide B. Shaw?
Okay, I don't know if you can see my desk clock.
Yes.
Okay, desk clock, ticking on pandemic time, ticking.
That's great. How many
Well,
tickings
certainly-
did you do? 3?
Well, no, I ended with 2. The last was just my facetious saying, ticking forever. No, I ended with on line 3, just 2 tickings, ticking.
Thanks.
Helen Ogden?
Yes, I have my sourdough starter, which has been with me since the beginning of the pandemic. Sourdough starter, bubbling in anticipation.
Thanks.
As are all the ready eaters around it.
Right. We're getting such a variety. This is really fun.
How about Scott Mason?
Okay, I can't show my object because I brushed it away, but here's the poem. A solo spider, free solo, my monitor.
That's very immediate. It was just right there. Now it isn't. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Picturing the tiny rope.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
How about Kristen Lindquist?
Sure. Before I read mine, there's one in the chat where the poet asks someone to kindly read his work because it's 2 a.m. where they are. So it's by Milan Rajkumar. And the first one, which I like here, is Lockdown Again, Dal and Rice and Dal and Rice.
Yeah. Thank you for reading that. It's great.
Thanks for reading Milan's. Did you want to read one of yours as well, Kristen?
Sure. This is my object. It's a pottery pitcher. So my hands where her hands were, pottery pitcher.
Mm.
It has that era. It's very concrete and familiar, and yet there's a mystery about it that kind of pops. So you don't.
How about Joe McEwen?
Okay, how about this one? Stained glass, the light in, the light out.
Kind of going two ways at once.
Yep.
People should mute if they're not actually reading because they're popping up
Yeah.
on the monitor.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Sari Grandstaff?
Hi, I have my object over there. Not going to bring it over, but it's a poinsettia, and it's basically still alive. But here's one leaf. When you had us look closer, that was dead. Fundraiser poinsettia, still bright red, still raising spirits.
Huh. Great. That's great. I'm glad you have a poinsettia in your home. That's kind of neat here in June.
How about Scott Wiggerman?
Hi. This is my object. And I actually wrote two things from it. The first one was coffee cup filled with pens and pencils, never coffee. And the other was from potter's shelf to writer's shelf, the cup and its dust.
The first one completed the circle because you started with coffee and ended with coffee, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
How about Blanca Vaquero?
Yes, hello. Well, I'm from Nova Scotia and I'm surrounded by farmland, so I wrote this. Cornfield. A bird watches the earwig that watches the corn borer.
Closely observed.
Yes, very.
How about Tony P?
Seashell that was my ex's before she was my ex.
Tony, could you read that again? We didn't catch the first word.
Sorry, the seashell that was my ex's before she was my ex.
Says a lot. Thank you.
Sandra Payne?
Hi, it's funny because I'm going to follow a seashell haiku with a seashell haiku. There it is. Simple seashell, building complexity, ridge upon ridge.
And that's exactly what they do. Yeah, thank you.
Some resonance on the last line.
Yep.
Hannah Mahoney?
Hey, thank you. Here's my whelk shell.
Oh, yeah.
Shell upon shell upon shell.
Yes, exactly. The whelk shell's whirling into itself, memories of my mother.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you.
You have the whole world in your hands.
Yes. I like the whirling into itself. That's lovely.
Thank you. What a great workshop. You guys are a great pair. You've got like the analytical side from Brad and then Jeannie's wonderful prompting, which always deepens my haiku practice every time.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. It's great working with Jeannie.
And Brad. We like working together, you guys can tell.
Judson?
Object is this little piece of driftwood.
Judson, we can't quite hear you. Can you get a little closer to the mic?
Yes, how's this?
Still a little hard. Can you yell?
Yeah, this is a piece of driftwood I found on the beach. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
And I tried two different versions of this. I tried barnacle to barnacle, following the drift of driftwood, and then rubbed between my fingers back in the driftwood.
So
I like them both.
that first one had a double repetition in it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Kika Weber? Kika, you're muted. Unfortunately, we still can't hear you. Do you have the sound off or something? Do you want to type it in chat and then one of us can read it?
Can you hear me there a little better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. This is a little metal disc that I got when I went down to the border to protest for the border wall. And this is a chunk of the metal that they were welding off. I think it was like to put the cement in. So they were draining water from a very spiritual area in Arizona. And so I wrote a disc melted from the border wall, melting borders.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very significant.
Christine Villa. You're muted, Christine.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Pandemic blues. Twirling, twirling, twirling my pencil.
Right. Now that sounds like kind of a universal haiku. That's where the individual becomes the universal, because I can think a lot of us doing that.
And I like the prop that you're using while you're saying it.
Yep, you bet.
How about Mark Gilbert?
Yeah, hi. Scribble pad, spider tracks, just scribbles.
That's great following the pencil one.
True.
Pencils and scribbles.
Yep.
Jeannie, should we do like 3 more and then end our session?
I'm thinking that's right, because we're at 4:53. Yeah.
Okay, how about Suzanne?
Thank you. I won't explain why this was the only natural object I had throughout the entire pandemic. But anyway, grocery bag, bagging tomatoes on the vine.
So 2 versions of bag.
That's right. Bagging, verb and a noun. Thanks.
How about Julie Kelsey?
Hello, mine is a rock. It's a crystal. It's kind of ugly, but I got it in Missouri on a hazardous waste site, actually. So my L1 sucks, but I thought I'd read anyway. Stained with Missouri clay, ground into memory, grounding stone.
Again, 2 versions of the same word. I think that works well.
Definitely.
And how about last but not least, Joel Meyer?
Thank you. It's there we go. Amber from Canada, and it has provided endless fascination over the last year. I tried to use color and repetition in this. Honey-colored amber, a golden world within a world. Ancient tree blood.
Nice.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really resonating poem, kind of keeps us with it right there.
So I'm going to share my screen again as we finish up. And we want to thank you very much for joining us. Jeannie, do you want to say goodbye before I read our last haiku?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, as Brad said, for joining us. It was delightful. It was really fun to hear all of your haiku. So we appreciate it a lot.
And I wrote this last poem with repetition in it as a tribute to Vince after he died. Whistling along with the hermit thrush, whistling with him. And perhaps we'll all whistle along with Vince and write more repetition haiku. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that we see a lot more repetition haiku.
Right.
And thanks, Celia, for moderating as well.
And thank you, Brad and Jeannie.